The blood on her dress had long since dried to a rust-colored stain by the time Florence Pierce stumbled into Trinidad, Colorado, half dead from exhaustion and 3 days without food. It was late autumn in 1878, and the mountain town sat nestled against the Sangre de Cristo range, like a child seeking shelter in its mother's lap. Florence had walked 40 miles from the overturned stagecoach where she had watched her uncle die, where the bandits had taken everything except her life, perhaps thinking her too young and frightened to survive the journey back to civilization. They had been wrong about that, at least. She collapsed near the livery stable, her body finally giving out after pushing far beyond what any person should endure. The stable boy found her there and ran for help, but it was the mountain man who came. Harrison Pike had been in town selling furs, a rare occurrence that happened only when winter approached and he needed supplies he could not hunt or trap. He stood well over 6 feet tall, with shoulders broad as an ox yoke and arms thick with muscle that rippled beneath his buckskin shirt. His dark hair fell past his collar, wild and untamed as the wilderness he called home, and his face bore the weathered lines of a man who had lived 32 hard years under sun and snow. Harrison lifted Florence as though she weighed nothing at all, cradling her against his chest while the townspeople gathered and whispered. Her eyes fluttered open for just a moment, barely registering the strong jaw covered in dark stubble, the intense blue eyes that seemed to look straight through to her soul. Then, darkness claimed her again. The doctor's office was full, 3 miners laid up with injuries from a collapse, so Harrison made a decision that surprised even himself. He carried the girl to the boarding house where he had rented a room, laying her on the bed with a gentleness that contradicted his rough appearance. The boarding house owner, Mrs. Chen, a Chinese woman who had earned respect through sheer force of will in a town that did not always welcome her, brought water and clean cloths. "She needs rest, food, warmth," Mrs. Chen said, examining Florence with experienced eyes. "She's been through something terrible. You see the blood on her dress? Not all hers, I think." Harrison nodded grimly. He had seen the signs, recognized the haunted look even in unconsciousness. Whatever had happened to this girl, it had marked her. For 2 days, Florence drifted in and out of fever dreams while Harrison tended to her. He had planned to leave Trinidad, to return to his cabin high in the mountains before the first serious snow, but something kept him there. Mrs. Chen brought broth and bread, but it was Harrison who coaxed spoonfuls past Florence's lips, who changed the cool cloths on her forehead, who sat in the chair beside the bed through the long nights. When Florence finally opened her eyes fully, truly conscious for the first time, she found herself staring at the rough-hewn ceiling beams of a room she did not recognize. Panic seized her chest, and she tried to sit up, only to have gentle but firm hands press her back down. "Easy now," a deep voice rumbled. "You are safe." She turned her head to find the mountain man sitting beside her bed, his large frame making the wooden chair look like a child's toy. In the daylight streaming through the window, she could see him clearly, the strong features, the powerful build, the eyes that held something she had not expected to find in such a rough-looking man. Kindness. "Where am I?" Her voice came out as barely more than a whisper, her throat raw and dry. "Trinidad. You walked in 3 days ago, near dead on your feet." He reached for a cup of water, sliding an arm behind her shoulders to help her drink. "Name is Harrison Pike. What do you remember?" Florence sipped the water gratefully, her mind churning through fragmented memories. "The stagecoach, my uncle, the men who stopped us," her voice caught. "They shot Uncle William, took everything. I thought they would kill me too, but they just rode away." Harrison's jaw tightened. "They left you to die slow instead. Probably figured the wilderness would do their work for them. I walked. I did not know what else to do." Tears burned in her eyes, but she blinked them back. She had cried enough over the past days, alone in the desert scrubland, stumbling toward mountains that seemed to never get closer. "Uncle William was taking me to his ranch. My parents died last year from influenza. He was the only family I had left." "How old are you?" 19. I will be 20 in December." Harrison studied her face, delicate features smudged with trail dust, dark hair matted and tangled, brown eyes that held more pain than any 19-year-old should carry. But he saw strength there, too, the kind that kept a person walking when they should have laid down and died. "You need proper rest food. Mrs. Chen, the lady who owns this boarding house, she's been helping look after you. When you are stronger, we will figure out what comes next." Florence nodded, exhaustion already pulling her back toward sleep. But as her eyes closed, she felt the warmth of his hand still supporting her shoulders, steady and safe as mountain stone. Over the next week, Florence regained her strength slowly. Harrison stayed in Trinidad, delaying his return to the high country for reasons he did not examine too closely. He told himself he was just making sure she recovered, that any decent person would do the same. But the truth was something else entirely, something that had taken root in his chest the moment he had lifted her from the dirt outside the livery. Florence learned bits of his story during those days. Harrison had come west 12 years ago, fleeing a life in Missouri that he never spoke about in detail. He had tried his hand at mining, at scouting, at a dozen other trades before finding his calling in the wilderness. For 8 years, he had lived alone in a cabin he had built with his own hands, high in the mountains where most men feared to tread. He trapped and hunted, coming down to Trinidad only twice a year to trade his furs and hides for the few supplies he could not make or do without. "You live up there all alone?" Florence asked one afternoon as she sat in the chair by the window, finally strong enough to be out of bed. "Is that not lonely?" Harrison was mending a tear in his coat, his large hands surprisingly deft with the needle. "Lonely is a crowded room where no one understands you. The mountains, they do not judge. They do not lie. A man knows where he stands." "But do you never want companionship? Someone to talk to?" He glanced up at her, those blue eyes intense. "Talking is overrated. Most people use words to hide what they really mean. I prefer straight truth, even when it is hard." Florence found herself blushing under his gaze, dropping her eyes to her lap. She wore a dress Mrs. Chen had given her, simple but clean, a vast improvement over the blood-stained ruin of her traveling clothes. Her hair was washed and braided, and color had returned to her cheeks. She was a pretty girl, Harrison thought, but more than that, there was something vital in her, a spark that all her trials had not extinguished. "What will you do now?" he asked, setting aside his mending. "Your uncle's ranch, do you know where it was?" "Outside of Pueblo, about 70 miles northeast, but I do not know if I could claim it. Uncle William never married, had no children. I suppose it goes to whoever can prove the best claim, and I have no papers, nothing to show I was his heir. The bandits took my traveling bag with all of my documents." Harrison frowned. "You could go to Pueblo anyway, talk to a lawyer. There must be someone who knew of your uncle's intentions." "Perhaps." Florence twisted her hands together. "But I have no money for a lawyer, no money for anything. I do not even have funds to repay you and Mrs. Chen for your kindness." "No one is asking for repayment. Still, I cannot simply accept charity forever. I need to find work, earn my keep somehow." She looked up at him, determination firing in her eyes. "I can cook and clean. I can read and write and do figures. My mother taught me. Surely someone in town needs help." Harrison knew the reality of Trinidad's job prospects for a young woman alone. The respectable positions were few, and the less respectable options too many. The thought of Florence ending up in one of the saloons, fighting off drunk miners and cowboys, made something fierce and protective rise in his chest. "Winter is coming fast," he said carefully. "In another few weeks these mountains will be buried in snow. Trinidad will be mostly cut off until spring thaw. Then I should find a position quickly, before people settle in for winter." He was quiet for a long moment, wrestling with an idea that had been growing stronger each day. It was madness, went against everything he had built his life around, but the thought of leaving her here, vulnerable and alone, was worse than any madness. "Come with me," he said abruptly. Florence stared at him. "What?" "To my cabin. I'm heading back tomorrow before the weather turns. You could come with me, stay the winter." He held up a hand before she could speak. "It is not what you might think. The cabin has 2 rooms. You would have your privacy. In spring I will bring you back down, and by then maybe you will have figured out your next step. At least you would be safe and fed through the winter." "Mr. Pike, I could not possibly." "Why not? You just said you need somewhere to stay, some way to earn your keep. I could use help preparing for winter, processing game, keeping the cabin in order. It is hard work, and the solitude is not for everyone. But you would be safe." Florence searched his face, looking for any hint of deception or ulterior motive. She had learned the hard way that men were not always what they seemed, that offers of help could come with strings attached. But Harrison's gaze was steady and honest, and something in her gut told her she could trust him. "You barely know me," she said softly. "Why would you do this?" "Because I know what it is like to have nowhere to go and no one to turn to. Because you deserve a chance to heal and figure out your path without being forced into choices you will regret." He stood, crossing to the window to look out at the mountains rising in the distance. "I will not lie to you, Florence. It will be hard. My cabin is remote, days from the nearest settlement. The cold is bitter and the work is constant. But if you are willing, there is a place for you there." She thought of the alternative, scrubbing floors in the boarding house for pennies, or worse. She thought of the long winter ahead, of being alone in a town where she knew no one, and she thought of this man, this Harrison Pike, who had cared for her when he had no obligation to do so, who had stayed when he should have returned to his home. "Yes," she heard herself say, "yes, I will go with you." They left Trinidad at dawn the next morning, Harrison leading a pack horse loaded with supplies, while Florence rode a sturdy mare he had bought for her. Mrs. Chen had packed food for their journey and given Florence warmer clothes, wool pants and shirts more practical than dresses for mountain life. Florence had tried to refuse, overwhelmed by the generosity, but Mrs. Chen had pressed the bundle into her arms with a knowing smile. "That man, he is one of the good ones," Mrs. Chen had said. "But the mountains, they are harsh. You be strong, yes? Be smart, and come back in the spring to tell me how you survived." The journey took 4 days, climbing higher with each mile. They followed trails that were barely visible, paths that Harrison navigated from memory and instinct. The aspens had already lost their leaves, skeletal white trunks standing like ghosts among the evergreens. The air grew thinner and colder, and Florence found herself grateful for the warm clothes and the steady presence of the man leading the way. Harrison was not much for idle conversation during the ride, but he pointed out landmarks and taught her things she would need to know: how to read the signs of approaching weather in the clouds and wind, which plants were safe to eat and which would kill her, where mountain lions liked to den, and how to make herself seem large and threatening if she ever encountered one. At night, they camped under the stars, and it was around the fire on their second evening that Florence realized she had never done this before. She had grown up in Ohio, in a proper house with a proper hearth. Even on the journey west with Uncle William, they had stayed at way stations and hotels. But this sitting on the cold ground with nothing but flames between her and the vast darkness was entirely new. She must have been shivering more than she realized, because Harrison looked over at her with concern. "You are cold." "I am fine," she lied, trying to keep her teeth from chattering. He made a sound that might have been amusement or exasperation. "Come here, closer to the fire." "I am close enough." "Florence!" His voice carried an edge of command that made her look up. "You are going to freeze to death out of some misguided sense of propriety. Move closer to the warmth." She hesitated, then shifted nearer to the flames. The heat felt glorious against her face and hands, but she was still trembling. Harrison shook his head and stood, moving around the fire to her side. Before she could protest, he had draped his heavy coat around her shoulders. It smelled of wood smoke and pine and something distinctly him, and it was still warm from his body. "You need that," she protested. "I have more meat on my bones. You just sit there and get warm." He settled beside her, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his body. "Tomorrow night we will reach the line shack I keep stocked. Proper shelter, better than sleeping on the ground." Florence pulled his coat tighter around herself, feeling something shift in her chest. This man, this stranger, who had become her protector and guide, had shown her more genuine kindness in 2 weeks than she had known in the past year. Since her parents died, she had felt adrift, passed from one situation to another like unwanted cargo. But here, in this wild place with this wild man, she felt something she had not expected to feel again. She felt seen. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for everything. For not leaving me in Trinidad. For trusting me enough to bring me to your home." Harrison was silent for a moment, staring into the flames. "You remind me of someone," he finally said. "My sister. She had that same stubborn strength, that refusal to quit even when the world gave her every reason to." He paused. "She died when she was 16. Fever took her. I could not help her, could not save her, no matter how hard I tried. Maybe that is part of why I stayed in Trinidad for you. Maybe I needed to finish what I could not finish for her." Florence felt her throat tighten with emotion. I'm sorry. I'm sorry you lost her. It was a long time ago, but some losses, they stay with you. They sat in companionable silence after that, watching the fire burn down to embers while the stars wheeled overhead in their ancient dance. Florence had never felt so small and so connected to something vast at the same time. The mountains surrounded them, dark presences against the night sky, and somewhere in the distance, a wolf howled, wild and free. The next day they climbed higher still, and late in the afternoon they reached Harrison's line shack, a small but sturdy structure built into a rocky outcropping. He kept it stocked with firewood and basic supplies for emergencies, and true to his word, they spent the night in relative comfort. Florence slept on a narrow cot while Harrison took the floor, and for the first time since the stagecoach attack, she felt truly safe. On the fourth day, they arrived at Harrison's cabin. Florence had been preparing herself for something primitive, little more than 4 walls and a roof. But while the cabin was certainly remote and rustic, it was also clear that Harrison had built it with care and skill. The structure sat in a small meadow surrounded by towering pines, with a creek running nearby and a view of the mountains that took her breath away. The cabin itself was made of thick logs chinked with mud and moss, with a stone chimney rising from one end and real glass windows, small but present. Inside, the main room held a fireplace, a table with 2 chairs, shelves lined with supplies, and a bed built into one corner. A door led to what Harrison called the back room, smaller and used mostly for storage, though it had its own narrow window and space enough for a second bed. I will set you up in the back room, Harrison said, already moving his few belongings. It is smaller but easier to heat. You will be warmer there. Florence watched him work, this big man moving efficiently through the small space, making room for her without complaint or expectation. She set about unpacking their supplies, falling into an easy rhythm with him that felt surprisingly natural. That first night in the cabin, Harrison built up the fire in the main room until it roared, heat pushing back the cold that crept down from the high peaks. Florence emerged from the back room where she had been arranging her things to find him standing by the hearth. Come sit, he said, gesturing to the chair he had positioned closest to the fire. You need to warm up properly after 4 days of travel. Where will you sit? I will use the other chair, or the floor. Does not matter. When she hesitated, he added more gently, Florence, you are skin and bones still, recovering from what you went through. Sit closest to the warmth. Let yourself heal. She moved to the chair, sinking into it with a sigh of relief. The heat from the fire soaked into her bones, and she realized with some surprise that she had been cold for days, maybe weeks, without fully acknowledging it. The tension in her shoulders began to ease. Harrison sat in the other chair, farther from the fire, and began the work of maintaining his knives and tools. They fell into comfortable silence, broken only by the crackle of flames and the whistle of wind outside. Florence found herself studying him in the firelight, this man who had upended his solitary existence to help her. His hands moved with practiced ease over the whetstone, sharpening each blade to a keen edge. The muscles in his forearms flexed and relaxed with the motion, and she noticed the scars that marked his skin, old wounds from a life lived hard and close to danger. What made you come to the mountains? She asked eventually. You said you left Missouri, but not why. Harrison was quiet for so long she thought he would not answer. Then he set down the knife he was working on and looked into the fire. I killed a man. Florence's breath caught, but she did not look away. It was a fair fight, he continued. He called me out, Drew first. But he was the son of a powerful family, and fair did not matter to them. They wanted revenge, legal or otherwise. I could have stayed and fought it in court, probably would have been acquitted. But I was 20 years old and angry at the world. My parents were dead, my sister gone. I had nothing keeping me there and everything telling me to run. So I did. Do you regret it? Leaving? No. Killing that man? He was quiet again. I regret that it came to that, but I do not regret defending my life. Out here, you learn that survival sometimes requires hard choices. Florence nodded slowly. The bandits who killed my uncle, they made a choice too. But theirs was evil. Yours was survival. There is a difference. Harrison looked at her with something that might have been respect. You have an old soul. Florence Pierce. I feel old some days, like I've lived too much in too short a time. I know that feeling. They talked late into the night, trading pieces of their stories like two people mapping unknown territory. Florence told him about her childhood in Ohio, her father's work as a schoolteacher, her mother's herb garden. She spoke of the fever that had taken her parents within days of each other, leaving her alone at 18 with no means to support herself. Uncle William had seemed like salvation, his letter arriving just as she was about to take a position as a maid in a house where the master had wandering hands. Harrison listened without interruption, his focus complete and unwavering. When she finished, he told her more about his life in the mountains, the rhythms of the seasons, the challenges and rewards of living on the edge of civilization. He spoke of harsh winters when the snow buried the cabin to the windows, of springs when the meadow exploded with wildflowers, of the pure satisfaction of providing for himself with his own hands and skills. "It is a hard life," he said, "but it is honest. The mountain does not care about your past or your mistakes. It cares only about your strength and your will to survive." That sounds lonely, though, even if it is honest. He met her eyes across the firelight. It was before. The word hung in the air between them, weighted with meaning neither was quite ready to examine. Florence felt her pulse quicken, felt heat that had nothing to do with the fire flush her cheeks. Harrison looked away first, standing abruptly. "You should get some rest. Tomorrow we start the real work of preparing for winter." Florence retreated to the back room, but sleep was long in coming. She lay in the narrow bed Harrison had built for her, listening to him move around the main room, eventually settling down. The cabin creaked and sighed around them, a living thing adjusting to the cold. And somewhere in the darkness, Florence acknowledged what was growing in her heart, frightening and thrilling in equal measure. The days fell into a pattern. Harrison rose before dawn and built up the fire, then woke Florence with coffee boiled strong enough to strip paint. They worked side by side through the daylight hours, preparing the cabin for the coming winter. Harrison taught her how to split firewood, though he did most of the heavy chopping himself, the axe rising and falling with mechanical precision as muscles bunched and flexed beneath his shirt. She learned to stack the wood properly so it would stay dry, learned to recognize which trees were dead and best for burning. He brought down a deer, and Florence helped him process the meat, learning to cut and preserve it for the long months ahead. It was bloody, difficult work, and her hands were clumsy at first, but Harrison was patient, showing her again and again until she got it right. They salted meat and smoked it, rendered fat for cooking in candles, scraped and treated the hide until it was supple and ready for use. "Nothing goes to waste," Harrison explained. "Everything the mountain gives, we use completely. That is the only way to survive." Florence discovered that she was stronger than she had known. Her body adapted to the work, muscles developing where there had only been softness. Her hands, which had once been smooth, grew calloused and capable. And with the physical changes came something else, a confidence, a sense that she could meet whatever challenges came. She also discovered that she enjoyed Harrison's company more than she had enjoyed anyone's in a long time. He was not flowery with words or given to pretty speeches, but everything he said was genuine. When he complimented her on learning a skill quickly, she knew he meant it. When he corrected her technique, it came from a place of wanting her to succeed, not to belittle. And slowly, carefully, they learned each other. Harrison found himself watching her more often than was probably wise, the way she approached each new task with determination, refusing to be defeated by difficulty, the way she laughed when she finally mastered something, a sound of pure triumph, the way she looked in the mornings, sleep-soft and tousled, stirring sugar into her coffee with more care than the harsh brew deserved. He had not expected this, had not planned for the possibility that bringing her to his sanctuary would change everything. But it had. The cabin no longer felt empty when he woke. The work no longer felt like solitary survival, but like building something together. And when she sat close to the fire in the evenings, close to the warmth as he always insisted, he found himself wanting to close the distance between them, to touch her hand, to see if she felt this thing growing between them too. But he held back. She had been through trauma, needed time to heal. And he was 12 years older, rough and uneducated compared to her schoolteacher's daughter refinement. What did he have to offer someone like her beyond temporary shelter? Florence, meanwhile, fought her own battle. She found herself thinking about Harrison at odd moments, noticing the way his eyes crinkled when he almost smiled, the way he moved through the world with quiet competence. She noticed the way he always made sure she ate first, took the best portions, the way he positioned himself between her and any potential danger, even something as simple as a startled deer. The way he had built her this life, temporary though it might be, and asked nothing in return. She had never known a man like him. The boys she had known in Ohio had been soft and proper, concerned with appearances and social standing. Her uncle, though kind, had been distant and often distracted by his business, but Harrison was present in every moment, engaged with the world in a way that was almost fierce, and she found herself drawn to that intensity, to the strength that was not just physical, but ran soul deep. The first snow came in mid-November, earlier than Harrison had expected. They woke to a world transformed, everything muffled in white. Harrison looked out the window with concern. "This is just the beginning," he said. "We have another month of preparation before the real winter sets in." But the snow kept coming. 3 days of steady fall that piled up against the cabin walls and bent the pine branches low. On the third night, huddled close to the fire while wind howled outside, Harrison finally spoke what they had both been avoiding. "If you want to leave, to go back down before we are truly snowed in, we need to do it soon. Another week, and it will be too dangerous." Florence looked at him, this man who had become her world in the span of a month. "Do you want me to leave?" "No." The word came out fierce, surprising them both. "No, I do not want you to leave. But you should know what you are committing to. Once we are snowed in, there is no going back until spring. You would be stuck here, stuck with me. If you realize you made a mistake, if you decide you cannot stand it, there will be no escape." "And you?" she asked quietly. "What if you realize you made a mistake letting me stay?" Harrison moved from his chair to kneel in front of hers, bringing them eye to eye. The firelight cast shadows across his face, emphasizing the hard planes and angles. "I do not make mistakes about people. I know what I want. But you deserve better than a mountain man with more scars than prospects. You deserve a real life, not this." Florence reached out, doing what she had wanted to do for weeks. She touched his face, her palm against the rough stubble of his jaw. "What if this is the real life I want? What if everything else was just marking time until I found this place? Found you?" "Florence?" Her name came out rough, almost broken. "I am not a child, Harrison. I am 19 years old, and I have seen enough of the world to know what is genuine and what is not. You are genuine. This is genuine." She leaned forward, her forehead touching his. "I want to stay. Not because I have nowhere else to go, but because I cannot imagine being anywhere else." He closed his eyes, breathing her in. "If you stay, if we do this, I will not be able to let you go come spring. You need to know that. I will not be able to watch you walk away." "Then do not watch me walk away. Watch me stay." Harrison opened his eyes and found her looking at him with complete certainty. And something in him, something that had been locked tight for years, finally broke free. He kissed her, gentle at first, questioning. Florence answered by pressing closer, her hands sliding into his hair, and the kiss deepened into something neither of them could control or wanted to. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Harrison rested his forehead against hers again. "Are you sure? Are you absolutely sure?" "I have never been more sure of anything." He stood, lifting her with him as easily as if she were made of air. "Then stay. Stay with me, not just for the winter, but beyond. Be with me, Florence. Let me spend my life keeping you warm and safe and happy." "Yes," she whispered against his mouth. "Yes to all of it." That night, the cabin held not two people existing in separate spaces, but two people becoming one. Harrison showed Florence the depth of his feeling with touch and whispered words, gentle despite his strength, worshipful in a way that made her feel precious. And Florence gave herself to him freely, completely, knowing that she was choosing this man and this life with eyes wide open. Afterward, they lay together in Harrison's bed, Florence tucked against his side with his arms around her. The fire had burned down to coals, but she was warmer than she had ever been, wrapped in his heat and his presence. I love you, Harrison said into the darkness. I do not know when it happened exactly. Maybe when I first lifted you from the dirt, or maybe when you refused to quit even though everything told you to. But I love you, Florence Pierce. I love you enough to have let you go if that was what you needed. I love you enough to thank whatever force brought you to my door. Florence felt tears slide down her cheeks, but they were tears of joy, of relief, of coming home to a place she had not known she was seeking. I love you too. I love your strength and your kindness, and the way you see me for who I really am, not who I'm supposed to be. I love you, Harrison Pike, and I will spend the rest of my life proving it. They fell asleep like that, wrapped around each other, while snow continued to fall outside and the mountains stood guard over their happiness. Winter closed in hard after that, but inside the cabin they built their own world. The days were filled with work-checking trap lines, hunting when the weather allowed, maintaining their supplies. But the nights belonged to them, to quiet conversations and shared meals and the gradual knitting together of two lives into one. Harrison taught Florence everything he knew about mountain survival. She learned to shoot his rifle, her aim improving until she could bring down small game for their pot. She learned to read the weather, to predict when storms were coming by the quality of the light and the behavior of animals. She learned which herbs could treat common ailments, learned to make soap and candles, learned 100 small skills that meant the difference between thriving and merely surviving. And Florence taught Harrison things too, though she did not always realize it. She taught him the pleasure of reading aloud on long winter evenings, working through the 3 books he owned until they could recite passages by heart. She taught him that sharing work made it lighter, that laughter could warm a room as surely as fire. She taught him that letting someone in, truly in, did not make him weak but stronger. They talked about everything during those long winter months. Harrison told her about his childhood in Missouri, his father's drinking and his mother's quiet desperation. He told her about the man he had killed, giving her details he had never shared with anyone, how it had been a dispute over a card game, how the other man had accused Harrison of cheating, how it had escalated despite Harrison's attempts to walk away. He told her about the guilt he still carried, not for defending himself, but for the waste of it all. Florence told him about the stagecoach attack, finally giving voice to the terror she had felt, how she had hidden under a seat while the bandits shot her uncle, how they had found her anyway, dragged her out, and she had been certain her life was over, how the leader had looked at her with cold eyes and said she was not worth the bullet, that the desert would kill her anyway. How she had walked for 3 days on that spite alone, refusing to give them the satisfaction of being right. "They were wrong," Harrison said fiercely, holding her while she cried for the uncle she had barely gotten to know, for the future that had been stolen. "You are worth everything, Florence. You are worth every bullet in every gun, worth more than they could comprehend." As winter deepened, they developed routines and rituals that became the fabric of their life together. Every morning, Harrison woke first and built up the fire, then brought Florence coffee in bed, sitting with her while she woke fully. Every evening, she prepared dinner while he did the last chores of the day, and they ate together at the small table, talking over the events of their separate tasks. Every night before sleep, they stood at the window together and looked out at the mountains, silver under moonlight or invisible in blowing snow. And Harrison would ask, "Are you happy?" And Florence would answer, "More than I ever imagined possible." Christmas came, marked only by the date on Harrison's calendar. He had never done much to celebrate, alone in the mountains, but Florence was determined to make it special. She had been saving sugar and dried fruit, and on Christmas Eve she baked something that was half cake, half bread, and entirely delicious. Harrison carved her a small wooden box with flowers etched into the lid, a place for her to keep the few treasures she owned, and they gave each other the gift of planning a future together. "When spring comes," Harrison said, "I want to marry you proper. We will go to Trinidad, find a preacher, do it legal and right." "I would marry you now if we could," Florence said. "I do not need a preacher to know I am yours and you are mine. But I need to do right by you. You deserve vows spoken in front of witnesses, your name changed to mine on official papers. You deserve everything I can give you, Florence." She kissed him, soft and sweet. "Then we will wait for spring and have our wedding. But in my heart, I am already your wife. And in mine, you are already the best thing that ever happened to me." January brought the worst of the winter. Blizzards swept down from the peaks with terrifying force, burying the cabin so completely that Harrison had to dig a tunnel to reach his woodpile. The temperature dropped so low that water froze in the bucket overnight, even inside the cabin. They burned through firewood at an alarming rate, and Harrison began to worry they might run short before spring. But they managed. They always managed, working together to solve each problem as it arose. When the chimney became blocked with ice, Harrison climbed up in dangerous winds to clear it, while Florence held the ladder in her breath. When Florence came down with a fever, Harrison nursed her through it with the same patient care he had shown in Trinidad, spooning broth into her and keeping her warm until the fever broke. When the root cellar began to flood from melting snow seeping through cracks, they spent 2 days hauling supplies up and repairing the damage. Through it all, their love deepened and matured. The initial passion did not fade, but evolved into something richer, a partnership built on mutual respect and genuine affection. They learned each other's moods and rhythms, learned when to give space and when to offer comfort. They learned to argue productively, navigating disagreements without cruelty or contempt. They learned that love was not just a feeling, but a choice made every day, a decision to prioritize the other person's well-being alongside your own. February brought the first hints that winter might eventually end. The days grew imperceptibly longer, and the quality of the light began to change. Harrison started talking about spring plans, repairs the cabin needed, improvements he wanted to make. Florence began planning a garden, choosing a spot near the creek that got good sun. "We could grow vegetables," she said excitedly, sketching ideas on precious paper. "Potatoes, squash, beans. Maybe even some herbs for cooking. I could preserve them for next winter, and we would not have to rely so completely on game." Harrison watched her plan their future and felt his chest tighten with emotion. She was not just surviving here, she was thriving. She had taken his solitary existence and transformed it into a real home, full of life and possibility. "We will need to expand the cabin," he said. "Another room at least, maybe 2. Florence looked up, her eyes sparkling. "Planning ahead, Mr. Pike?" "Hoping ahead, Miss Pierce, hoping that our family might grow, given time." She crossed to him, wrapping her arms around his waist. "I hope for that, too. Children running in the meadow, learning the mountains the way you have taught me. A life full of love and laughter and hard work. It will not be easy raising children out here. They would be isolated, far from schools and other children. But they would be free," Florence countered, "free to grow up close to nature, to learn real skills, to understand what truly matters. And we could teach them, you know so much about surviving in the wild, and I could teach them reading and writing and arithmetic. They would not be ignorant, just differently educated." Harrison pulled her closer, resting his chin on top of her head. "You have thought about this." "I have thought about nothing but our future since the day I told you I was staying. I want it all, Harrison. I want the garden and the expanded cabin and the children. I want to grow old with you in this place, watching the seasons turn. I want to be buried in these mountains when my time comes, my bones part of the rock and soil. This is home. You are home. Then that is what we will build," he promised, "together." March arrived with dramatic swings between winter and spring. One day it would snow, the next the sun would shine warm enough to melt half the drifts. Harrison began making short trips away from the cabin, checking his trap lines and scouting the conditions. The snow was still too deep for them to travel down to Trinidad, but it would not be much longer. One afternoon, Harrison returned from checking traps with a troubled expression. Florence looked up from the stew she was stirring. "What is wrong?" "There are tracks near the southern trap line. Big cat, probably a mountain lion. It has been sniffing around, maybe drawn by the scent of trapped game." Florence felt a chill that had nothing to do with temperature. She had learned enough about mountain lions to know they were apex predators, dangerous and unpredictable. "What should we do?" "I will track it tomorrow, see if I can drive it further away. It is probably just hungry after a hard winter, but I do not want it getting comfortable around here, especially if—" He trailed off. "Especially if there might be children around eventually," Florence finished. "I understand. Be careful, please." The next day, Harrison set out at dawn with his rifle and his knife. Florence watched him go with her heart in her throat, trying to quell her anxiety by throwing herself into work. She scrubbed the cabin floor, mended clothes, baked bread, anything to keep her hands busy and her mind from imagining all the things that could go wrong. Hours passed. The sun climbed toward its zenith and began its descent. Florence had expected Harrison back by early afternoon, but as the light started to fade, worry gnawed at her stomach. She stood at the window, straining for any sign of him, until finally she saw his familiar form emerging from the trees. He was limping. Florence ran outside without bothering to grab her coat, meeting him halfway across the meadow. Blood stained his left leg and his face was pale with pain. "What happened? Harrison, you are hurt." Found the cat. It decided to fight instead of run. He leaned heavily on her as they made their way to the cabin. "I won, but it got a swipe in before I could shoot." Inside, Florence helped him to a chair and carefully cut away the torn fabric of his pants. The wound was deep, 3 parallel gashes running from his thigh to his knee. She forced herself to be calm, to remember everything he had taught her about treating injuries. She boiled water and cleaned the wounds as thoroughly as she could, then used precious whiskey to disinfect them. Harrison gripped the arms of the chair hard enough to make the wood creak, but did not cry out. Florence stitched the worst of the gashes closed with careful sutures, her hands steady despite her fear. "You're going to have impressive scars," she said, trying to keep her voice light as she bandaged his leg. "Add them to the collection." Harrison reached for her hand, squeezing it. "Thank you. You did well, Florence. Better than most field medics I've known. You terrified me, being gone so long. I am sorry. It took longer than I expected to drag that cat far enough away that other predators would not be drawn here by the carcass. But it is done. We should be safe now." Over the next week, Florence took over all the outside chores while Harrison's leg healed. She checked the trap lines, hauled water from the creek, split firewood. Her body had grown strong enough to handle the work, though she was exhausted by the end of each day. Harrison chafed at his confinement, frustrated by his inability to contribute. "Stop frowning," Florence said one evening, settling beside him with her mending. "Your leg will heal faster if you rest it properly." "I should be taking care of you, not the other way around." "Marriage is partnership, remember? Sometimes one person carries more of the load. Right now it is my turn. When I am sick or injured, it will be yours." She kissed his cheek. "Besides, I like proving I can manage. You have taught me well." Harrison pulled her close, breathing in the scent of her hair. "You continually amaze me. When I found you in Trinidad, you could barely stand. Now look at you, strong enough to run this place on your own." "Not on my own, never on my own. We are a team, you and I." By mid-April, Harrison's leg had healed enough for him to resume his duties, though Florence noticed he favored it when he thought she was not watching. The snow was melting rapidly now, revealing the brown grass of the meadow and the first brave wildflowers. The creek swelled with runoff, and the sound of water was everywhere. "Another few weeks and we can make the trip to Trinidad," Harrison said one morning. "Get married like we planned, stock up on supplies, check if there is any news about your uncle's ranch." Florence had almost forgotten about the ranch, so completely had this life consumed her thoughts. But Harrison was right. They should at least try to claim what might be her inheritance. If nothing else, they could sell it and use the money to improve the cabin or save for the future. "Do you think they will let us marry?" she asked. "Some people might object to how we have been living here, unmarried." Harrison's jaw tightened. "Let them object. We have done nothing wrong, and I will not let anyone make you feel ashamed. Besides, Mrs. Chen will vouch for us. She knew we were coming up here together. I just want it to be official. I want to be Florence Pike in the eyes of the law, not just in my heart." "You will be. I promise you that." They spent the remaining weeks preparing for their journey down the mountain. Harrison hunted and prepared furs to trade, while Florence organized their list of needed supplies. They packed carefully, knowing they would be gone at least a week and possibly longer, depending on what they found in Trinidad. The night before they were set to leave, they stood at their usual spot by the window, looking out at the mountains silvered by moonlight. The meadow spread before them, and beyond it, the forest rose toward the high peaks still snow-capped and eternal. "Are you nervous about leaving?" Harrison asked. "About going back to civilization, such as it is?" Florence considered the question. "A little. This has been our sanctuary, away from the rest of the world. I suppose I'm afraid that going back will change things somehow. Nothing will change what is between us. Nothing could. I know. I trust that. She turned to face him, reaching up to trace the strong line of his jaw. I just want the rest of the world to acknowledge what we have, to recognize that we belong together. They will, and if they do not, we will come back here and forget they exist. He kissed her, slow and deep. You are my wife in every way that matters, Florence. The ceremony is just making official what has been true since the day you chose to stay. They left at dawn, retracing the path they had taken 6 months earlier. The journey down was easier than the journey up had been, the trails clear and the weather mild. Florence found herself noticing things she had missed on that first trip, the way certain rock formations marked good camping spots, the particular shape of a lightning-struck tree that indicated a fork in the trail. She was learning to read the wilderness the way Harrison did, to see it as home rather than hostile territory. They reached Trinidad in 3 days, arriving to find the town in the midst of spring renewal. Buildings that had been shuttered all winter were opening up, and miners and ranchers who had waited out the cold months were emerging to resume their work. The town felt crowded and loud after months of mountain silence, and Florence found herself pressing closer to Harrison's side. Ms. Chen saw them from the boarding house window and came out with a cry of joy. "You survived! I wondered if you would come back, both of you together." She looked between them, her knowing eyes taking in the way they stood close, the way Harrison's hand rested protective on Florence's back. "I see. This is good. Come inside. Tell me everything." Over tea and rice cakes, they told her an edited version of their winter work, the blizzards, the mountain lion. They told her about their plans to marry, and Mrs. Chen beamed with approval. "The priest comes through next week," she said. "He travels circuit, performs marriages and baptisms. You wait for him, yes? Do this properly." "We will wait," Harrison agreed. "In the meantime, I need to find someone willing to perform a legal marriage, and Florence needs to see about her uncle's property." Chen's expression turned serious. "About that. There was a man here in February looking for information about your uncle. He claimed to be a business partner, said he had rights to the ranch. I told him nothing about you. I did not trust his manner, but you should be careful. He may still be around." Florence felt ice in her stomach. What did he look like? Tall, thin face, scar across his left cheek. He wore fancy clothes, but they did not suit him, if you understand. Like a wolf dressed in sheep's clothing. Florence gripped Harrison's hand. "That sounds like one of the men from the stagecoach. Not the leader, but one of his gang. I remember the scar." Harrison's expression went hard and dangerous. "He is here, in Trinidad?" "I do not know if he is still in town," Mrs. Chen said. "But if he is probably watching for any sign of you, Florence. He may suspect you survived." "Why would he care?" Florence asked. "They left me to die. If I am alive, it does not matter to them." "It does if your survival threatens their claim to your uncle's property," Harrison pointed out. "If you are your uncle's heir, they cannot simply take the ranch. But if you are dead or presumed dead, they might be able to claim it through forged documents or intimidation." Florence felt the walls of their sanctuary crumbling, the outside world intruding with all its ugliness and danger. "What do? We go to the law," Harrison said firmly. "We file your claim properly, get it registered. Then we get married and make sure everyone knows you are under my protection." His voice dropped to something deadly. "And if that man or any of his friends try to hurt you, they will learn what happens when someone threatens what is mine." They went to the sheriff first thing the next morning. Sheriff Daniels was a grizzled man in his 50s, weathered by years of keeping the peace in a rough town. He listened to Florence's story with careful attention, occasionally making notes. "Your uncle, William Calhoun. I knew of him," the sheriff said. "Good man from what I heard. Bought that ranch 5 years ago, built it up to something respectable. You say he was bringing you to live there when he was killed?" "Yes. He was my mother's brother. My parents died last year, and he offered me a home." "And you can prove your relationship to him?" Florence's heart sank. "The papers I had were in my traveling bag. The bandits took everything." "That complicates matters. Without documentation, your claim will be harder to prove." The sheriff drummed his fingers on his desk. "But not impossible. There might be records in Pueblo, correspondence from your uncle, and if we can find witnesses who knew of his intentions." "What about the man Mrs. Chen described?" Harrison interrupted. "The one with the scar, claiming to be William Calhoun's partner." "I sent him packing 2 weeks ago," the sheriff said with satisfaction. "He had forged papers, not even good ones. I may be rough around the edges, but I know my way around legal documents. He was trying to steal that ranch, plain and simple. When I threatened to jail him for fraud, he disappeared." "But he might come back," Florence said. "He might, which is why you need to file your claim officially and get yourself protection." The sheriff looked at Harrison. "You planning to marry this girl?" "Planning to marry her this week, if I can find someone to perform the ceremony. Judge Morrison is in town. He can do it legal. As for the religious ceremony, Father O'Brien will be here Monday." The sheriff stood, extending his hand to Harrison. "You seem like you can handle yourself in a fight, Mr. Pike. But if you need backup dealing with these bandits, you let me know. I do not take kindly to people preying on young women in my territory." They left the sheriff's office feeling marginally better. At least Florence's claim was now officially filed, and law enforcement knew about the threat. Next, they visited Judge Morrison, a stern man with kind eyes who agreed to marry them the following day. "Usually I require more notice," he said, "but given the circumstances, I will make an exception. However, I will need a witness." "I will witness," Mrs. Chen declared. She had accompanied them, insisting that Florence needed a woman's support during such an important time. "And I will throw a proper celebration afterward. You cannot get married without celebration." That evening, Florence and Harrison walked through Trinidad as the sun set, hand in hand. The town was rough and raw, nothing like the refined society Florence had grown up in, but it felt welcoming in its own way. People nodded greetings to Harrison, recognition and respect in their eyes. He had earned his reputation here through years of fair dealing and quiet competence. "Are you nervous about tomorrow?" Harrison asked as they paused at the edge of town, looking toward the mountains rising in the distance. "Not nervous exactly. Excited, maybe. After everything we have been through, the actual ceremony feels almost unnecessary. I already know I am yours." "But you deserve the ceremony," Harrison said firmly. "You deserve to hear me make those vows in front of witnesses, to know that I am choosing you legally and publicly as well as privately." Florence squeezed his hand. "Then I will stand with you tomorrow and promise to love you for the rest of my life, and we will make it official in the eyes of God and man." They were married the next day at noon in Judge Morrison's office, a simple ceremony that nonetheless carried profound weight. Florence wore a new dress Mrs. Chen had insisted on buying her, simple blue calico but clean and pretty. Harrison had bathed and trimmed his hair and beard, looking almost civilized in a borrowed jacket. But his eyes held the same wild intensity they always did, and when he spoke his vows, his voice rang with absolute conviction. "I, Harrison Pike, take you, Florence Pierce, to be my lawfully wedded wife. I promise to protect you, provide for you, and love you for all the days of my life. I promise to honor your strength and support your dreams. I promise to be faithful in body and heart, to stand beside you through whatever trials may come. You have my word, my heart, and my life from this day forward." Florence felt tears streaming down her face as she spoke her own vows. "I, Florence Pierce, take you, Harrison Pike, to be my lawfully wedded husband. I promise to be your partner in all things, to share your burdens and your joys. I promise to love you fiercely and without reservation, to build our life together with care and dedication. You have made me stronger, braver, more complete than I ever imagined possible. I give you my heart freely, knowing it will be treasured. From this day forward, I am yours." Judge Morrison pronounced them married, and Harrison kissed his wife with tender reverence. Chen wept openly, and even the judge looked moved. Florence Pierce was now Florence Pike, and the rightness of it settled into her bones. Mrs. Chen threw a celebration that night at the boarding house, inviting half the town. There was food and music, dancing and laughter. Florence discovered that Harrison could dance after a fashion, his movements rough but earnest. They swayed together to fiddle music, while miners and shopkeepers and the few other women in town clapped along. "Happy?" Harrison murmured against her ear, deliriously. Late in the evening, a man approached them. He was well-dressed, prosperous-looking, with the bearing of someone accustomed to authority. "Mr. and Mrs. Pike," he said formally. "My name is Charles Bennett. I'm an attorney from Pueblo. I heard you were in town, Mrs. Pike, and I have been hoping to speak with you." Florence felt Harrison tense beside her, protective instinct flaring. "About what?" Harrison asked. "About your uncle's estate," Bennett said, addressing Florence. "William Calhoun was my client. He made a will 6 months ago when he sent for you. I've been trying to locate you since his death." Florence's heart raced. "A will? He left me his property?" "He left you everything, Mrs. Pike. The ranch, his savings, his stock and equipment. I have the documents with me, properly witnessed and filed. You are his sole heir." Bennett pulled papers from his satchel. "I have also been investigating the circumstances of his death. The men who killed him were part of a gang that has been terrorizing this territory for 2 years. The leader is a man named Jack Sutton. I believe one of his associates has been trying to claim your uncle's property through fraudulent means." "The sheriff mentioned something about forged papers," Harrison said. "Indeed. When Sutton's man could not locate Mrs. Pike, either to eliminate her or to coerce her into signing over the property, they attempted forgery. Fortunately, Sheriff Daniels is more astute than they anticipated." Bennett looked at Florence seriously. "You are a wealthy woman, Mrs. Pike. Your uncle built a successful operation, but you are also in danger. Sutton does not give up easily, and he now knows you are alive and filing claims." Harrison's arm tightened around Florence's waist. "She is under my protection. Anyone who wants to hurt her will have to go through me first." Bennett nodded approvingly. "I can see she has chosen her husband well. But Mr. Pike, these men are dangerous. They have killed before and will not hesitate to kill again. I recommend you take precautions." "What kind of precautions?" Florence asked. "For one, do not travel alone. For another, consider hiring additional security for your property. And," Bennett hesitated, "I have been in contact with the U.S. Marshal Service. They are interested in Sutton's gang, want to bring them to justice. If you were willing to testify about what you witnessed, it could help build a case." Florence felt cold despite the warmth of the room. The thought of facing those men again, of recounting the terror of that day, made her feel sick. But she thought of Uncle William, of his kindness in offering her a home, of his senseless murder. She thought of other women who might find themselves in similar situations if Sutton's gang was not stopped. "I will testify," she said firmly. "If it helps bring them to justice, I will do whatever is necessary." Bennett looked relieved. "Thank you, Mrs. Pike. The marshal will contact you with details. In the meantime, these papers make you the legal owner of the Calhoun Ranch. I suggest you visit the property, assess its condition, and decide how you wish to proceed. I can recommend a good foreman if you need help managing it." After Bennett left, Florence and Harrison retreated to the room Mrs. Chen had given them for the night. Florence sank onto the bed, overwhelmed. "I own a ranch," she said numbly. "A whole ranch." "How do you feel about that?" Harrison asked carefully. "Conflicted. Grateful to Uncle William for his generosity. Sad that he died before I could truly know him, scared of the men who killed him. And," she looked up at Harrison, "worried about what this means for us." He sat beside her, taking her hand. "What do you mean?" "The ranch is near Pueblo, 70 miles from here. Your cabin is in the mountains, days from anywhere. We cannot be in both places at once. And I do not want to give up what we have built together in the mountains, but this property represents security, a legacy from my uncle. How do we choose?" Harrison was quiet for a long moment, turning over the problem. "We do not have to choose right away. We could visit the ranch, see what condition it is in, talk to the foreman, if there is one. Figure out if it can run itself or if it needs constant attention. Maybe there is a compromise." "You would be willing to live on a ranch? Give up the mountains?" "I would be willing to do whatever keeps us together and keeps you safe," Harrison said firmly. "The mountains are important to me, but you are more important. If we need to make changes, we will make them." Florence leaned against him, drawing strength from his solid presence. "We will figure it out. Together." The next few days were busy with preparations and planning. The marshal arrived, a taciturn man named Gray, who took Florence's statement about the stagecoach attack with careful attention to detail. He confirmed that Sutton's gang was wanted for multiple murders and robberies across 3 territories, and that Florence's testimony would be valuable in bringing them to trial if they could be caught. "We have been tracking them for months," Marshal Gray said. "But they are smart, keep moving, never stay in one place long. However, their attempt to claim your uncle's ranch suggests they might be getting bolder, taking more risks, if we can use that to our advantage." "You want to use Florence as bait," Harrison said flatly. "Not bait, exactly. But if word spreads that she is visiting the ranch, it might draw them out. With proper protection and planning, we could set a trap." "Absolutely not," Harrison said before Florence could speak. "I will not risk her life to catch these men." "Harrison," Florence said quietly. "Let him finish." Marshal Gray outlined his plan. Federal agents would be positioned around the ranch, hidden, but ready. Florence and Harrison would visit openly, making their presence known. If Sutton's gang took the bait, the agents would be ready to capture them. "I understand the risk," Gray said, "and I will not force Mrs. Pike to participate, but these men have killed at least a dozen people that we know of. If we do not stop them, they will kill more. Your uncle's murder could be avenged, and future lives could be saved." Florence looked at Harrison, saw the fear and fury warring in his expression. She understood after everything they had been through, the thought of deliberately putting herself in danger must be agonizing for him. But she also understood the weight of responsibility, the knowledge that her courage could make a difference. "I need to speak with my husband alone," she said to the marshal. After Gray left, Florence turned to Harrison. "Before you say no, please listen. I have already said no. I will not let you do this. It is not your decision alone, Harrison. I love you and I value your protection, but I am not a helpless child. Those men killed my uncle. They have killed many others. If I can help stop them, should I not try?" Harrison stood abruptly, pacing the small room like a caged wolf. "You ask me to stand by while you offer yourself up to murderers? How can I do that?" "You would not be standing by. You would be beside me, protecting me as you always have, and we would have federal agents watching over us. It is as safe as such things can be." "Nothing about this is safe," Harrison's voice cracked. "Florence, I just found you. I cannot lose you. If something happened to you because I agreed to this plan—" He stopped, breathing hard. "I could not survive it." Florence went to him, taking his face in her hands. Look at me, Harrison. I am terrified too. The thought of seeing those men again makes me want to run back to the cabin and hide. But I cannot hide forever. They will keep threatening us, keep trying to claim what is mine until they are stopped. This is our chance to end it. And if the plan fails, if something goes wrong, then you will do what you do best, survive, and keep me alive while you do it. She pressed her forehead to his. I trust you, Harrison Pike. I trust you with my life. Have faith that together we are stronger than anything they can throw at us. He closed his eyes, every instinct screaming at him to refuse, to take her back to the mountains where she would be safe. But he also knew she was right. Running would not solve the problem, would only delay the inevitable confrontation. If we do this, he said slowly, we do it my way. I scout the ranch first, learn the terrain. I position myself where I have the best vantage point, and at the first sign that anything's going wrong, I get you out of there. Agreement? Agreement. They informed Marshal Gray of their decision the next morning. He looked relieved and immediately began organizing his forces. Within 2 days, a plan was in place. Harrison and Florence would visit the ranch, ostensibly to assess the property and meet with the foreman. Word would be quietly spread that Florence Pike, heir to William Calhoun's estate, would be at the ranch for several days. Then they would wait. The journey to the ranch took 2 days on horseback. Marshal Gray and 4 other agents accompanied them, but kept their distance, not wanting to alert potential observers. Harrison spent the entire ride hyper-vigilant, his hand never far from his rifle. Florence tried to project calm she did not entirely feel. The ranch, when they finally arrived, was more impressive than Florence had expected. It sat in a valley with good grazing land, the main house a sturdy 2-story structure with a wide porch. There were outbuildings, a barn, a bunkhouse, a stable, all well maintained. A middle-aged man came out of the house as they approached, his weathered face breaking into a cautious smile. "Can I help you folks? I am Florence Pike, William Calhoun's niece. This is my husband, Harrison." The man's expression transformed to one of relief and grief mixed. "Mrs. Pike, we heard about Mr. Calhoun, what happened to him. Terrible thing. I am Marcus Wright, foreman here. Mr. Calhoun hired me 3 years ago." He shook both their hands. "We did not know what would happen to the ranch, who would inherit. Some of the men left, not wanting to work for an unknown owner. But I stayed, keeping things running best I could." "Thank you for that," Florence said sincerely. "Can you show us around?" Wright gave them a comprehensive tour. The ranch ran cattle and some horses, with about 60 head currently on the property. There were 3 remaining ranch hands, good men according to Wright, who had stayed out of loyalty to Calhoun's memory. The house was comfortably furnished, and Florence felt a pang seeing touches that must have been her uncle's books on the shelves, maps on the walls, a pipe still sitting by the fireplace. "He was a good man," Wright said, seeing her expression. "Fair and honest. He talked about you sometimes after he sent for you. Was looking forward to having family nearby." Florence blinked back tears. "I wish I had known him better." That night, they stayed in the main house while Marshal Gray's agents positioned themselves around the property. Harrison did his own scouting, locating every potential approach and escape route, planning his response to various scenarios. He barely slept, every sound bringing him to full alertness. The first day passed without incident. Florence met with the ranch hands, discussing the operation and assuring them she intended to keep the ranch running. Harrison maintained constant vigilance, his body coiled tight with tension. The second day, trouble arrived. Florence was in the barn with Wright, examining the horse stock, when she heard Harrison's voice, sharp and commanding. "Florence, get down!" She dropped instantly, pulling Wright down with her, just as gunfire erupted outside. Through the barn door, she could see men on horseback, at least 5 of them, riding hard toward the house. The federal agents emerged from their hiding places, returning fire. The battle was sudden and explosive, gunshots cracking through the afternoon air. Harrison appeared in the barn doorway, rifle in hand. "Stay low. Do not move unless I say." More gunfire, then shouting. Florence crouched in the straw, her heart hammering, while Wright muttered prayers. She heard Harrison fire several times, methodical and precise. Then, gradually, the shooting stopped. Silence fell, broken only by the nervous stamping of horses and distant voices. Harrison remained at the door, weapon ready, until Marshal Gray appeared. "It is over. We got 3 of them, including Sutton himself. 2 got away, but we will run them down." Harrison lowered his rifle but did not relax. "Florence, you can come out now." She emerged on shaking legs to find chaos men lying on the ground, some wounded, some dead. The federal agents were busy securing prisoners and tending to injuries. And there, in the dirt of her uncle's ranch, lay Jack Sutton, the man who had murdered William Calhoun and left Florence to die. He was still alive but badly wounded, his cold eyes finding hers. "You," he gasped, "should have finished you." "But you did not," Florence said, her voice stronger than she felt. "And now you will pay for what you did." Sutton died before they could get him to town, but not before confessing to multiple crimes in front of Marshal Gray and several witnesses. The 2 gang members who escaped were captured 3 days later. By the end of the week, the threat that had haunted Florence since that terrible day on the stagecoach was finally ended. Harrison and Florence remained at the ranch for another week, helping restore order and making decisions about its future. Florence offered Wright a partnership. He would continue running the ranch and receive a share of the profits, while she and Harrison maintained ownership. It was an arrangement that benefited everyone, giving Wright stability and Florence income without requiring them to live there permanently. "Are you sure about this?" Harrison asked as they prepared to return to Trinidad. "This is a valuable property. You could sell it, or we could move here permanently." Florence looked around the ranch that represented her uncle's hard work and dreams. It was beautiful and prosperous, but it did not call to her heart the way the mountains did. "I am sure. Uncle William built something good here, and I want to honor that by keeping it running. But this is not home. Home is a cabin in the high country with the man I love. That is where I want to be." Relief flooded Harrison's face. "Then that is where we will go." They returned to Trinidad long enough to finalize arrangements with Attorney Bennett and to resupply. Mrs. Chen threw them another celebration, this one for their survival and victory. The town had heard about the shootout, and Harrison Pike's reputation grew the mountain man who had helped bring down the notorious Sutton gang. But Harrison had no interest in fame or attention. As soon as they could manage it, he and Florence packed up and headed for the mountains. The cabin looked exactly as they had left it, standing strong and welcoming in the meadow. Florence practically ran the last 100 yards, so eager was she to be home. Inside, everything was familiar and dear. The fireplace where Harrison had insisted she sit closest to the warmth, the table where they had shared countless meals, the bed where they had become truly husband and wife. Home, she breathed, tears of happiness streaming down her face. We are finally home. Harrison wrapped his arms around her from behind, resting his chin on her head. And now we stay. No more trips to town for a while, no more dealing with the outside world. Just us and the mountains. They fell back into their rhythms quickly, the cabin resuming its role as sanctuary. The money from the ranch gave them security they had not had before Harrison could buy better tools and supplies. Florence could order books and materials for the improvements they planned. But the core of their life remained the same: hard work, simple pleasures, and the deep connection between them. Summer was glorious in the high country. The meadow exploded with wildflowers, and Florence started her garden, coaxing vegetables from the rocky soil with patience and care. Harrison expanded the cabin, adding a second bedroom as they had discussed. The work was hard, but they labored side by side, laying logs and chinking walls, building their future one piece at a time. In August, Florence realized she was pregnant. She had suspected for a few weeks, but when she finally confirmed it, joy and fear warred within her. She was going to have a baby, miles from any doctor or midwife, dependent entirely on Harrison and her own strength. She told him on an evening when they sat by the fire, her now familiar spot closest to the warmth. "Harrison, I have something to tell you." He looked up from the knife he was sharpening, instantly alert to the seriousness in her voice. "What is it?" "I'm with child. We're going to have a baby." For a moment he just stared at her. Then a smile broke across his face, genuine and brilliant, transforming his rough features. "A baby? Florence, are you certain?" "I am certain." He crossed to her, kneeling in front of her chair and placing his hands gently on her still flat stomach. "A baby," he repeated, wonder in his voice. "Our child. Florence, His voice caught. "I never thought I would have this. A family. A real family." She ran her fingers through his hair, her own happiness bubbling up. "You will be such a good father, strong and patient and kind. Our child will be so lucky." "When?" "February, I think, early spring." Harrison's mind was already racing ahead, planning and preparing. "We will need supplies, more medical materials than I usually keep. I should get books about childbirth, learn as much as I can. And we need to make sure you stay healthy, no taking unnecessary risks." "Harrison," Florence said with amusement, "women have been having babies since the beginning of time. I will be fine. But you are my wife, and this is my child. I will not take chances." He looked up at her, his eyes intense. "Promise me you will be careful. Promise me you will let me take care of you." "I promise. Now come sit with me, and let us just be happy about this miracle." They spent the rest of the evening making plans and dreaming about the future. Would they have a son or a daughter? Would the child have Florence's dark eyes or Harrison's blue ones? What would they name the baby? The possibilities stretched before them, beautiful and terrifying and perfect. As autumn arrived and Florence's belly began to swell with new life, they prepared in every way they could. Harrison made a cradle, carving it from pine and sanding it smooth. Florence sewed baby clothes from soft fabric, her stitches tiny and precise. They discussed how they would manage the birth, what could go wrong, and how they would handle it. Harrison even made a trip down to Trinidad in late November, before the heavy snows came, to consult with the doctor and buy additional supplies. Winter settled in again, but this time the cabin felt even more alive. Florence remained healthy and strong, her body adapting to pregnancy with minimal problems. She continued to help with daily tasks, though Harrison increasingly took over the heavier work. He was protective to the point of being overbearing sometimes, but Florence understood it came from love and barely restrained fear. "I will be fine," she reassured him repeatedly. "Women's bodies are made for this." "But what if something goes wrong? What if I cannot help you?" "Then we will deal with it together. just as we have dealt with everything else. Have faith, Harrison. Have faith in me and in what we have built." Christmas came, their second together, and they celebrated quietly. Florence was 7 months along now, moving more slowly but still radiating happiness. Harrison had carved a set of wooden animals for the baby, small and perfect, and Florence cried when she saw them. "You made these?" She turned the tiny horse over in her hands, marveling at the detail. "I want our child to grow up with beauty, even out here, to know that things can be made with care and love, not just utility." "You beautiful, wonderful man." She kissed him deeply. "Our child will know they are loved. How could they not with parents like us?" January brought bitter cold but clear skies. Florence spent more time indoors now, resting frequently as the baby grew large. Harrison barely left her side unless absolutely necessary, his worry a palpable presence. But beneath the worry was excitement, barely contained anticipation. On a night in early February, during a howling blizzard that buried the world in white, Florence's labor began. Harrison had been prepared, had studied everything he could find about childbirth, but nothing truly prepared him for the reality. Florence's pain, her bravery, the terrifying hours of waiting and hoping and praying. But Florence was strong, stronger than either of them had realized. She labored through the night while the storm raged outside, Harrison by her side every moment. He held her hand, wiped her face, spoke encouragement when she needed it, and stayed silent when she needed quiet. And in the early hours of the morning, as the storm began to ease, their son was born. The baby's first cry cut through the cabin, and Harrison felt his entire world shift. This tiny, perfect human, this miracle they had created, was real and alive and theirs. Florence sobbed with relief and joy, reaching for the baby Harrison carefully placed in her arms. "A boy," she whispered, examining every finger and toe. "Harrison, look at him. Look at our son." Harrison was looking, but he could barely see through his own tears. Their son, red and wrinkled and beautiful, nursing at Florence's breast. The circle completed, the family made whole. "What should we name him?" Harrison asked, his voice rough with emotion. Florence thought of her father, the schoolteacher who had given her a love of learning. Thomas Pike. What do you think?" "Thomas," Harrison repeated, testing the name. "Thomas Pike. It is perfect. He is perfect. Florence, you are perfect. How did I ever deserve this?" "We deserved each other," Florence said firmly. "And we deserve this happiness. We have fought for it, earned it. Now we get to live it." They spent the rest of that day in a cocoon of new family, the three of them wrapped up together while the world stayed white and cold outside. Thomas was healthy and strong, and Florence recovered well from the birth. Harrison moved through the following weeks in a state of constant wonder, marveling at the tiny life that now depended on them. As winter slowly gave way to spring, they settled into new routines that accommodated their growing family. Thomas was an easy baby, content and curious, and both parents discovered they were naturals at this new role. Harrison could soothe the baby's cries with low humming, carrying Thomas against his broad chest while he did chores. Florence nursed and sang and watched her son discover the world with wide, wondering eyes. In May, when the snow had melted enough to travel, Harrison made a trip to Trinidad to register Thomas's birth and to pick up supplies they needed. He returned with news Pueblo had erected a marker at the site where William Calhoun's stagecoach had been attacked, honoring his memory and marking the place where justice had been served. Attorney Bennett had sent a letter congratulating them on their son's birth and informing them that the ranch had been very profitable that year. Their future was secure, at least financially. But Florence and Harrison measured their wealth in different terms. They counted it in sunrises over the mountains, in Thomas's first smile, in the garden that grew larger and more productive each year. They measured it in the room Harrison added to the cabin when Florence became pregnant again 2 years later, and then again when their daughter was born the following spring. Emma Pike arrived during a gentle snowfall in March, a little girl with her father's blue eyes and her mother's dark hair. Thomas, now 2.5, was fascinated by his baby sister, always wanting to help care for her. Harrison and Florence watched their children grow with profound gratitude, knowing how close they had come to missing all of this. Life in the mountains was never easy, but it was good. They faced challenges, harsh winters, difficult seasons, the constant work of survival. But they faced everything together, the bond between them growing stronger with each passing year. Florence never regretted her choice to stay in that cabin, to build her life in the wilderness with this remarkable man. And Harrison thanked whatever force had brought Florence to Trinidad that autumn day, half dead and hopeless, giving him the chance to save her, and in saving her, to save himself. The children grew up wild and free, learning to read from their mother and to survive from their father. Thomas inherited Harrison's size and strength, while Emma had Florence's quick mind and determination. They knew nothing of the violence that had brought their parents together, only the love that had kept them together. Every evening, the family gathered by the fire, Florence always sitting closest to the warmth as Harrison had insisted from that very first night. They would talk about their days, make plans for tomorrow, tell stories, and laugh. And in those moments, with his wife beside him and his children at his feet, Harrison Pike knew he had everything a man could want. Years passed, measured in seasons and snowfalls, in children's growth and acquired skills. When Thomas was 10 and Emma 8, they made the journey to Trinidad as a family, introducing the children to Mrs. Chen and showing them the town where their parents' story had begun. Mrs. Chen, now elderly but still sharp, blessed the children and proclaimed them fine examples of what love could build. They visited the ranch, too, where Wright was now elderly himself, but still managing the property with the help of his own sons. The ranch had prospered, providing steady income that Harrison and Florence invested in land, buying up the meadow and surrounding forest to ensure their sanctuary remained protected. Thomas and Emma were amazed by the ranch, by the cattle and horses, and the different life their parents could have chosen. But when it was time to leave, both children eagerly headed back to the mountains, to the cabin that was home. "You do not regret it?" Florence asked Harrison one night after the children were asleep. They sat in their usual spots by the fire, older now, but no less connected. "The life we chose? Sometimes I wonder if the children would have had more opportunities if we had stayed closer to civilization." Harrison took her hand, calloused palm against calloused palm, both marked by years of hard work. "I regret nothing. Our children know what truly matters, family, hard work, integrity. They can survive anything life throws at them. What more could we give them than that?" "Love," Florence said simply. "We gave them love, the kind that is demonstrated every day, not just spoken. They know what it looks like when two people truly choose each other, support each other, build together." "Then we have given them everything," Harrison said, pulling her close. "Everything that matters." When Thomas was 16, old enough to manage the cabin for a few days, Harrison and Florence made a special trip back to where it all began, not Trinidad, but the spot where he had first insisted she sit closest to the fire. The cabin had expanded over the years, but that original fireplace remained, the heart of their home. "Do you remember?" Harrison asked, standing before it. "That first night when you had never sat close to a fire before?" "I remember being cold and lost and feeling like maybe I had made a terrible mistake agreeing to come here with a stranger." Florence smiled at the memory. "And then you built up this fire and made me sit right here, closest to the warmth. You said I needed to let myself heal. And did you? Heal? More than that. I found myself. I found my strength. I found you." She took his hand. "Thank you, Harrison. Thank you for seeing something worth saving in that half-dead girl who stumbled into Trinidad." "I saw you," he said simply. "The real you, under all the pain and fear. I saw courage and determination and a heart that refused to quit. How could I not love that? How could I not do everything in my power to protect it?" They stood together before the fire that had warmed so many of their days, their lives intertwined so completely it was impossible to imagine them separate. Behind them, the cabin held the accumulation of their years' photographs and children's drawings, books and tools, all the physical evidence of a life well lived. As they aged, Harrison and Florence gradually passed responsibilities to their children. Thomas, now a man grown at 20, had built his own cabin across the meadow with his new wife, a strong woman from Trinidad who had proven herself capable of mountain life. Emma, at 18, was courting a young man from Pueblo, a lawyer who admired her intelligence and was willing to split his time between town and mountain to be with her. Harrison and Florence became grandparents, delighted by the new generation that carried forward their legacy. They taught their grandchildren the skills they had taught their children, passing down knowledge and stories. The meadow that had once held just Harrison's solitary cabin now housed a small family compound, separate homes, but connected by love and shared purpose. On their 20th wedding anniversary, Harrison and Florence stood at their favorite spot by the window, looking out at the mountains silvered by moonlight, just as they had done countless times before. Their hair was gray now, their bodies marked by years of hard labor, but their love had only deepened with time. "Would you do it all again?" Harrison asked. "If you could go back to that day in Trinidad, knowing everything that would happen, would you still choose this life?" Florence did not hesitate. "In a heartbeat. Every joy, every challenge, every moment I would choose it all again, because I would choose you. You are the best decision I ever made, Harrison Pike." He kissed her, tender and sweet, a kiss that held 2 decades of shared life. "And you are the miracle I never knew I needed. The warmth I did not know I was missing. You made this cabin a home, made my life complete. I love you, Florence Pike, more now than even on the day we married. And I love you, my mountain man, my protector, my partner, my home." They lived many more years in their mountain sanctuary, watching their family grow and thrive. Harrison lived to 72, Florence to 69, both of them active and engaged until their final days. When Harrison passed peacefully in his sleep one winter night, Florence grieved deeply, but took comfort in the life they had built, the love they had shared, the family they had created. She lived another year without him, tended by her children and grandchildren, still sharp and engaged with the world. On the anniversary of the day Harrison had first insisted she sit closest to the fire, Florence gathered her family around her. "I want you all to remember something," she said, her voice still strong despite her age. "Love is not just a feeling. It is a choice made every single day, a commitment to put someone else's well-being alongside your own. Your father taught me that. He chose me, protected me, built a life with me. And I chose him back, every day for 40 years. That is what I want for all of you, not just love, but the courage to choose it daily, to build it consciously, to fight for it when necessary." She passed that night, peacefully, surrounded by the family that was her greatest achievement. Her children buried her next to Harrison in the meadow they had loved, under the mountains that had sheltered them. The cabin remained in the family, passed down through generations. The fireplace where Florence had first sat closest to the warmth still stood, and the story of how Harrison and Florence's love had begun there became family legend. Children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren grew up hearing how their ancestors had built a life in the wilderness, how they had chosen each other despite every obstacle, how their love had been the foundation for everything that came after. The Pikes became known throughout the territory as a family of strength and integrity, people who kept their word and helped their neighbors. The original cabin became a kind of shrine, preserved as it had been in Harrison and Florence's time, a reminder of where it all began. And on cold winter nights when the family gathered in the expanded lodge that had grown up around that original structure, they would sit by the fire and tell the story of the mountain man and the woman he had saved. They would speak of how Harrison had insisted Florence sit closest to the warmth, not just that first night, but every night thereafter, protecting her and cherishing her until his dying day. They would speak of Florence's courage in choosing a life that was hard but true, of her strength in building something beautiful from tragedy. The story became legend, passed down through generations, a testament to what love could build when it was genuine and freely chosen. And though Harrison and Florence Pike were long gone, their love remained, woven into the very fabric of the mountains they had called home, warming the hearts of their descendants, just as that first fire had warmed Florence on the night that changed everything. In the end, theirs was a love story measured not in grand gestures or poetic declarations, but in daily choices and steady devotion. It was a love built by hands that worked together, survived winters together, raised children together. It was a love that asked for nothing but gave everything, that protected fiercely and forgave freely, that chose warmth and connection over coldness and solitude. And it all began on a night when a mountain man looked at a woman who had never sat in front of a fire and decided she deserved to be warm.